Welcome to Leaders in Lending. I'm your host, Jeff Keltner. This week's episode features my conversation with Joe Keller, the VP of Digital Assets at Visions Federal Credit Union. I enjoyed this conversation. Digital assets is a fascinating topic. We delve into a little bit the underlying technologies, assets outside of cryptocurrency. We actually delve into real estate, both the applicability of digital assets and blockchains to physical real estate and the concept of digital or metaverse real estate. So a very wide-ranging conversation about a really interesting topic that I think is on everybody's minds right now as we think about where blockchains and crypto fits into the future. So please enjoy this conversation with Joe Keller. Joe, thanks for joining the podcast. I appreciate you making the time today.
I appreciate you guys having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited for this conversation. You're in an area that everybody wants to know about and diving in deeper, which is great. And I want to start, when we were talking earlier, you had mentioned a talk you gave with some younger students or consumers and their perspective on digital assets generally that you found intriguing. So I kind of wanted to start there, laying the groundwork of like these digital assets, consumers' anticipations, expectations, interactions changing. So what was it that you heard that surprised you?
Yeah, I think I think every single time I go and have a conversation with different groups, whether it's the same look and feel of group in different areas, I almost get different answers. And that's probably the most interesting part about it is no matter who you talk to, you just get some kind of different spin or pull. But I think there is this real rooted sense of, hey, the world is changing, so let's change with it. And digital assets and crypto and how I interact with whether it be my financial institution or with a peer or a merchant is changing. And they're comfortable with that change. But it's also interesting, like you go to certain areas and it's almost like they've never even heard of crypto. And then you go to other areas and it's like, oh, if you're not invested in crypto, like you might as well be broke. So it is such a wide range of conversations. But yeah, it's all over the place. But it definitely is that sense of the world is changing. Let's change with it versus like, why are we dabbling in this space?
Yeah, I'm curious if you hear real intrigue or interest in particular kinds of digital assets. And I love that we're talking about digital assets and not cryptocurrency, because I feel like cryptocurrencies is one very specialized kind of digital asset, but there's the space and the concept is so much more broad and interesting. But where do you see interest, or where do you personally have interest when it comes to different kinds of digital assets? Do you own any interesting digital assets?
I do own a few. I don't think you can play in this space without actually playing in the space. So I do own a few, and I'm definitely one of those learn by doing people. So I had to get out there and even 5-6 years ago, just get involved in different ways. Obviously, 2021 was like the year for everybody to get involved, and I think I saw a stat, something crazy like 40 or 50% of the people who were involved in the asset ownership of crypto got involved in it within the last 12 months. So it's like, oh, yes, you guys all bought on the absolute stream, and now it's falling off a cliff. And now everybody's like, well, I guess that was kind of bust. But it's interesting because it's very correlated to kind of what the market is doing right now with kind of the risk-off environment we're in. So it is interesting. I think you have to be involved. I think how you get involved in digital assets probably is somewhat of where you are in life, but also how you think the application of digital assets also makes sense. So if you think of it just as a payment mechanism, then you're probably going to get involved in just a basis of how do I exchange something between two people? How do I hold something of value? If you think of it a little bit differently in the sense of, okay, if I have a real world asset that could be represented digitally, would I want to own that? Let's say like a piece of real estate that I could convert into, instead of a true title on paper, could I make it a digital title on a digital registry and own it that way? How could I tokenize it or make fragments of that token over time? I think that's really interesting. And then you even go down this marketplace of kind of the digital world in general, right? And so you get these people all playing in, whether it be the metaverse in that or any kind of augmented reality. And the use of digital assets in that space where digital is only is really interesting too, because it's, hey, I was talking to a small group of it was college kids, and they were wrapping their heads around like, well, how does this have any value? And that was kind of the question they kept coming back to. How does crypto have any value? And so it's a great question. It's like, okay, well, and then you're breaking down like, well, why did anything ever have value if it wasn't truly backed or had some kind of one-to-one of something else that had value. But then you could just go down and like, well, then why does gold have value?
Yeah, the one that really got me, I think it was Ben Thompson from Stratechery who made the comparison to baseball cards, and I kind of went, okay, when I was debating about NFTs and how is this NFT and do you really own and somebody can just copy and whatever, and I'm having this debate, and they and I read his piece. He said, well, he compared it to baseball cards, and I thought, well, yeah, it's a piece of cardboard with ink on it. I mean, anybody can the pictures online. You can print it, you can recreate it, you can make a mint one, and somehow, they're worth money because someone else will pay you more than you got. But there's no inherent. I mean, it's a piece of cardboard, right? Like we throw these things out when they come from Amazon a couple times a day, and yet we think of that one as being special. And so that was, I had a hard time finding a reason that an NFT was in some substantive way different than a baseball card, which can trade for quite a bit of money. So that was at least a real world example where I went, maybe it's not as crazy and out there as it sounds to me when I first think about it, because, there are things in the real world that are equally crazy when you really peel back the onion.
Yeah, well, and it's funny he uses the baseball card because that's like the easy singular, like, okay, it means something to somebody value, right? The other side of that coin, and probably why we're having such a hard time regulating crypto in general, is you've got the inverse where there actually is functionality behind a coin or a token, right? So as soon as my coin or my token has some kind of, it's a producer of something, well, now I look more like a business. Now I look more like a security. Now I look more like a stock. Okay, well, now I can see why people not really sure how to regulate it. How does it pass the Howey test? How do we go through some of these things? So when you go through those questions of value, it is interesting. You kind of almost got to start with crypto or digital assets as an entire asset class, and then start pulling it off. And then you start going, well, that's really just a technology that you're using. That's just a store of value. That's actually a system by which I'm going to do something. Well, that's actually a company that produces coins, which the coins are worth something, and the relation to the functionality that is that token or that coin. So it's all over the place. I think that's why it's so hard, but also so interesting for what's going on in this environment right now.
A couple things you said I want to dive into, but first I want to go back to one thing you said, which was learn by doing. So for the audience member that is not doing a lot, and I'll follow you down this trail. It's going to be. Is there recommendations for you other than like you can say open a Coinbase wallet and buy some Ethereum and some Bitcoin and some Solana and whatever? But are there like examples of digital assets that you feel like are good examples where somebody could go and learn by doing? Maybe something they could try. It's not.
Yeah, and I don't think it's always like put your money where your mouth is either, right? Like a lot of people, as soon as it's
I bought an NFT for 50 cents, right? I wanted to do it, but I found it's not a particularly impressive piece of art, but it's it's
mine. But even just kind of exploring, I think we talked about the metaverse a little bit and kind of that space too. You can get involved in some of those areas which are creating, and you're seeing a lot more companies getting involved in producing NFTs or releasing NFTs with different products. That's an easy way to kind of get started. An easy way also is like you always got to ask yourself, hey, if I'm about to own an asset or someone's about to give me something, well, where do I put it, right? And so, well, if it's a digital thing, you've got to have a digital place to put it. And so then wallets become a question. So now go down kind of that wallet path of like, okay, explore the wallets, download a wallet, decide if you want a hardware wallet or a software wallet, decide if you want a cold or a hot storage, like kind of going through that question and answer to yourself with something that probably doesn't have a lot of monetary value because you're going to mess it up the first time. You're probably going to forget your key or forget your passcode. And next thing you know, you don't want to be the guy searching through a pile of rubbish trying to find his $75 billion worth of Bitcoin on a jump drive. So, it's those kind of things that I would say getting involved doesn't have to mean go buy, but it does mean start seeing how these things are being used. Go find one, go see a company that's doing it. Jump in the metaverse, right? There's a lot of opportunity there. Just kind of like go and see. And I'm not a huge metaverse fan as much as it's just something that is something different. So you're going to go, you're going to learn, you're going to experience, and that's probably going to open your mind to something else.
Well, I want to dive back into metaverse and real estate. First, I'll give my thing, which is somebody told me, I said, help me out with digital assets and NFTs. And they sent me to Zed Run. I don't know if you've ever done this, Joe, but I bought a digital racehorse. I mean, it was like $100 or something. It wasn't a lot of money. But then it races and it gets standings and it gets stronger and you can train it. And I didn't have the time. I'm not like a gamer, so I didn't have the time for it, but you really saw a different side of what was possible. My kids loved it because you could go and enter it in a race and actually they do a 3D, you can watch the horse race and he pulls ahead and he falls behind and whatever. But it was a fascinating, at least a way, like an example for me where I could go acquire one of these more, not just an NFT that was a photo that now like I can look at OpenSea and see my photo, but I could actually interact with it in a more real life way. So that was mine.
Sports one is that's interesting. I'm gonna forget the name of the game, but there's a FIFA actually partnered with somebody,
Hmm.
and there's a soccer and football being the more traditional form of it.
Yeah.
That is an NFT game, but you build a team basically like through the leagues. So you get your free
Hmm.
team first, which is, but then as you win games and play other opponents, you earn coins or earn more points, and you can buy higher NFTs, better players, all the way up to the Ronaldos of the world, and you can form a super team, and then now you're in the Premier League, and you're actually battling. And supposedly these competitions are for hundreds of euros and things like that that are going on. So it's there's places to explore and just kind of
Yeah,
get it.
gaming is the very natural place where NFTs kind of like have an easy first. I'm not gonna say the only, but definitely a place where you can have a digital good. It makes sense to be able to have some custody of it, to be able to trade it, to be able to sell it and use it, and it can increase and decrease in value over time, and in very real ways, right? If it's a sports team or players on a sports team or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Um, so I wanted to before I think real estate is this really interesting way to look at digital because there's both I think a real world enabled by digital concept in real estate, and then there's like a digital world in the metaverse concept. So I want to dive into that, but first I wanted to back up a minute and say, you made the comment that you're as interested in the underlying technology being transformative as individual use cases. So before we dive into individual use cases, I thought it was worth kind of diving into what that underlying technological capability that is in your mind so transformative is and why that's such a shift in capability.
Yeah, and I wouldn't necessarily say it's vetted out well enough to know that it's just like any innovation. And I have this conversation with people all the time, right? We have innovation that occurs, and there's a statement about the innovation that is up here, and it's going to transform everything, and it's completely transparent, and it's trustless, and it's all these kind of things that are. And it's like, okay, maybe, and maybe at its purest form with no fraud and no other things that could happen, like maybe it could get there. But how do we know it could get there? And we got to know by doing. So when you look at the technology, and that's I would say here at Visions, that's kind of our core focus is okay. Let's first look at it as an asset. Then let's understand how would people want to use the asset, and that kind of gets into maybe some lending dynamics or some collateralized lending components. And then you get into okay, well, could other things be a digital asset? Yep, okay. Maybe we could see loans being actually a piece of paper digitally rather than an actual wet signature. Okay, secondary markets participations could be an obvious case where, hey, I don't want to fund this whole hotel by myself. Let me go securitize this in a different way. Okay, if I can do it fully digital, make a transaction easier to transform. So the use of blockchain and distributed ledger technology, tokenization of an asset, and the components that's built in with that, additionally smart contracts, you start to see this ecosystem being built that actually starts to connect the dots, and you go, okay, it really is the basis of the core functions of what we do in financial services, right? Like I take people's money, I store their money, I lend their money, and I give other people money. Like that's basically the core functions, making it really simplistic. And if I could do all those in an easier, more transparent way, alleviating any of the intermediaries or making it more automated, less human interaction, less errors, those kind of things, like you kind of naturally just have to explore it, right? So just as much as ease of use for internet-based or digital banking, it was just an obvious you have to go down that path. Like there's a purpose to go into a building and still do banking, but there's also a reason that I don't need to anymore. And so you have to kind of make that easier for people and encourage people to continue down that path. So part of our job is continued exploration, but it's also understanding the technology well enough to say, hey, is there true application? If there is application, how quickly would the application get adopted? Because that's kind of the big gap right now I see is adoption. Some of this stuff really makes sense. There's use cases for it. People starting to do things. But if nobody actually adopts the use of that technology, the greatest technology is going to go aside until the adoption occurs, right? And you saw that even in the history of kind of all innovations, you have these moments of a car was awesome, but everybody kind of looked at the car like it was crazy, and all of a sudden it didn't get produced for X amount of years because it just was unfeasible and the adoption just wasn't there. Then all of a sudden, once the adoption happens, it's the race takes off to how fast can do. EV is a good today use case, right? Like EVs have been around for forever. It feels like pretty much as long as I've been alive, but nobody really used them. And all of a sudden, Tesla just decided, no, we're absolutely making this a use case that we're going to force adoption and encourage adoption. Now, this year, I don't think there's a brand you would name that doesn't have an electric vehicle or it doesn't have a plan to have the electric vehicle in the next year. And there's some that are saying we're not going to make a consumption vehicle outside of electric in 5-10 years, right? So
Yeah, it's kind of amazing how fast that's really changed. You think about the number of manufacturers who are put out hybrids, and then now they put out an EV, and now they're saying in 5 years or 7 years, whatever, will be all EVs. And I think it's an interesting comparison to things like digital, because it's some of the infrastructure, right? Like I own one internal combustion engine car and one electric vehicle, and the electric's great, but then you go on a long road trip and you're like, well, where are the charging stations? They go, well, it goes 300 miles. I'm going, yeah, but from a charging station. So depending where I'm going, you know, that may not be close to my destination. And so, you can, it takes longer to charge, and all those things are changing. And so what was inconceivable 30 years ago is now, for day to day, it's a great car for me around town. So it's fantastic. And then there's like edge cases where it doesn't work, and those things are all changing. So a lot of it's not even just some of it's the technology itself improving, and some of it is the infrastructure that enables adoption. And in crypto, it might be on ramps and off ramps, right? And clarity on taxation and things like that that say, hey, we can actually rely on these things and use them, and not just like our consumers going to adopt it, but have we built the full ecosystem of things that somebody needs outside of just the Bitcoin, and enable someone to actually use it for the things that it can be better at.
You're always going to do the easy things first, right? And it's the easiest to create and also the highest dollar to capture, right? Like that's where people are going to chase first, and
That's
so
where you go first.
so that's what happened. That's how we got
Absolutely.
a huge spike, and now here we are. Now everybody's like, okay, but now what?
So
So
let's talk about two use cases that I think are kind of polar opposites, but the same in that they're real estate. Which is to say, let's talk about how crypto can be applied to real world real estate. It's about the least digital asset, my house, but the least digital asset I own in many ways. And yet, I think there's a lot of ways in which the technologies underlying crypto can actually greatly improve the process of buying, selling, and financing real estate transactions in the real world. And that's something I know you've got experience in the real estate finance and the whole space of real estate. So give me your thoughts on that, because I think it's interesting, and then interesting to compare that and contrast that to like metaverse real estate, whatever that might mean. Let's start
yeah,
with the real world first.
no, I like it's something we talk about a lot of times. That one of the hardest things for people with digital assets is, well, if I have a real asset, a real tangible thing, how do I make it digital? And then once I make it digital, how do I make sure nothing happens to the real asset? So like the connecting of the dots is really hard. So I can even see you can go down some of these, let's call it easy paths. So you could go down the lending path first and say, well, we're already making the lending process more user friendly, more digital. I never actually have to see somebody in person. I never have to actually physically sign anything. Okay, I can fully digitally enable something that way. Okay, well, depending on the state, maybe easier than others. Depending on the country, for sure, easier. So you can go down that path. You can see how it would work. Well, now that I have a digital file that represents even just that loan or a loan connected to a title, well, what about the title? Well, the title has been registered, and that plot of land was registered forever ago in some county or city on some registration system that has now become a book that has so many numbers tied to it. It's hard to keep up with, and you need a lawyer to write up the contract, right? It's hard to say, well, who actually owns that? And then how do I make sure that that is the only person who has owned that, has a lien against that? All these kind of different components that you need, all these intermediaries to justify that transaction is legitimate. And even then, all of them have clauses in their insurance that says, well, we may be wrong. And so, you go through this entire process and pay all these components to do that. Well, if we could get to a place where we have a system that is touting itself to be fully transparent, fully traceable, I can see everything I'm doing. If it's built that way, now I can shift that title, even if it's just at one point in time, over to that system. And then from there on out, I no longer need, because I can just write a script that's going to confirm Joe owns this house. Correct. Yeah.
Well, it seems odd in some ways as a good asset class for digitization and being on an open ledger. It's also like a unique asset class, and that ownership of it in most places is a public record. Like it's already the kind of public nature of the blockchain is like, well, turns out the county recorder's office is the same. Like if you go and ask, they'll tell you who owns
Yep.
this piece of land right here.
I can do a cloud search on any piece of property and figure out who owns it. The name may not be exactly clear, but I can at least
you got corporations and all the rest of it. But those things it's interesting because it is it's very similar. It's a public record of ownership of a good, and really, when you get to the county recorder's office, it's not like the house is there. You've got a number that says, and there's some recording somewhere of like that number equals this plot of land, and Jeff owns that number, i.e. that. And so, while it feels very separated from a digital reality, like it's not. All those kind of abstractions are already done. They're just done on pen and paper in the basement of some county building, usually.
Yeah, I think it was probably 3 or 4 years ago. I was having a conversation with somebody in this space, and as a former consultant, like the first question is always like, okay, well, how could it be done? Could you scale it? Could it make it work? All these kind of pieces. You're trying to build out this master plan real quick. And you're like, every single city, county, state has different rules, different process. There are all these and so for someone to do this, you would have to build something that would then, and by the way, there's a whole bunch of revenue tied to it as well, for those counties and taxes and blah, blah. So not only do you have to solve that you're going to possibly pull some of that tax away from them or the revenue away from them, but also the control away from them. Like, oh, okay, now how do I, at all levels, but you have to start somewhere. So, I've been kind of waiting to see one of these maybe tech forward cities, states, counties basically just said, hey, listen, we're converting our entire record book to a digital registry. And from here on out, it's going to be a digital registry. And that system that's built might be the system that other counties, cities are like, you know what? Yep, we'll adopt that as well. And next thing you know, you do have a national database that's possible.
It's interesting because you talk about all the different policies and rules and laws in different places, but I've been around a lot of technology shifts, and it turns out that when you've got a better technology for the end customer, a lot of times the rules that it doesn't work just become rules that we don't use anymore, right? Because the rules end up often being dictated by the available technology to do the thing. If the technology is better, you go, well, if the better way to do it is X, and my rules don't support X, we need to shift the rules around so we can actually leverage this technology. So that may sound backwards to many people, but I think it's not as far-fetched as you think.
No, I think
the benefits.
Yeah, I think number one thing you're dealing with, right, is adoption, right? Can you get people to actually use it? And then secondarily, if consumers want it and it's better for consumers, most cities, states, counties are run by officials who get elected by those people. And so you have a natural kind of snowball that could be created in those environments. Like, oh, my cousin out in whatever state is already doing this, and they get to save $500 a year on their taxes because they have a digital registry system. Like, why haven't we done this yet? That's where it's going to head. Like, we'll see what actually occurs. But the system has to be there. Technology has to be really clamped down, because at this point in time, I think that's the miss, right? We have this idea for technology. There's some use cases, there's some adoption there, but is it really well known enough to start doing public record with? So
yeah, we'll see. I think that'll be one of the tests, right? And so let's maybe wrap on we've amazingly gone through most of our time already, but on the kind of polar opposite, which is like the not digital technology for facilitating physical real estate, but like digital real estate. Because in the concept of the metaverse, there is an idea of real estate, and this is an idea that's, it's been around for a long time. People in science fiction have been writing about the concept of the metaverse in one form or another for decades and decades, well before there was any technology that would even mirror it. And this concept of, is real estate, is it infinite and therefore of no value in the metaverse? Or is it, in some ways, location, who gets there first gets the best spot and makes a ton of money the way you would if you bought a downtown Manhattan piece of land way back in the day. What's your take on what goes on with real estate and the digital world, the metaverse?
I think both ends of the spectrum are right now, unfortunately. I don't think there is this, and you think about even just the initial adoption of the internet of, okay, well, at some point in time, domain names in general became, oh man, you got to own that domain name. And there's still substance to that because of the centralized control of search engines. But at some point in time, even that's kind of shifting. Like, if you have enough content and if you are the actual provider of that thing, you're going to end up getting ranked high enough. You may have to pay to be in the top 3, but you're going to end up being ranked on the first page at least, right? So there is some that general concept of, well, infinitely available is there real value to it? Well, there's value to the content of what you have there. The inverse being you can have sites that are pay only sites, or you could have sites that or metaverses or digital landscapes that are, hey, you have to have a subscription to join. Well, in that space, you could for sure see an area that says, well, I'm paying to be part of the yacht club. And in order to have the best dock and yacht, I have to pay the most amount of money to own the dock that everybody has to walk by and the yacht that everybody has to see first. Like, okay, I could see that being valuable and having, especially in the retail or the consumer space, having clout. If you create that environment where people want to be, then the real estate there could definitely become very valuable. But it's all digital, so does it solve some of those other things we were just talking about of, well, who actually owns it, how's it transferred, all the intermediaries in between?
Yeah, it's interesting. When we started Upstart, it was actually harder to get a hold of social media handles than domain names, and in many ways more important, right? Because people, from an interaction point of view, find you on social media, and that's like every site's different. You often can't buy a handle off somebody, and there's still a lot of interesting, but like that's almost more important. And I wonder in the world of mobile apps if it's not shifting again to some other set of things are more or less important. But it's interesting that finding acquisition of your the digital real estate associated with your brand is not, it's not physical real estate, but it is like, it goes, well, we want upstart.com. Okay. We find that was for sale, buy that. Okay. And how do you get a Twitter handle? How do you get a Snap handle? How do you get a Facebook handle? Like somebody owns it, it's a really interesting thing at some point, what that really means. So it'll be interesting to see it play out. I don't think anybody really knows the answer yet.
You guys bought your Ethereum handle yet?
I bought my Ethereum. I got my ENS for personally, but I don't know that Upstart has yet. We should go get a handle on Ethereum and maybe Solana and every blockchain that's got a namespace. Go get your.
It feels like it's another race right now.
Yeah. And I don't know how easy they are to transfer. I mean, the way you could sell a domain name, and there was a whole business in that back in the day. People who bought domain names early, but ultimately, I think the point you made, which I really like, is the value of most of the real estate in the digital world in the end accrues to the people who create value for consumers through it, right? And that's right now the most valuable real estate on the internet is probably the first search results page on Google. And you didn't get there because you were there first. You got there because at this point, we don't need to get into a whole Google bias, good or bad argument.
You need to go through the SEO world.
Theoretically, they are highlighting the sites that are adding the most value to consumers, and so there's a way to climb to the top of that. That's not be there first, but kind of be the most value add, the place people want to be, the place people interacting with. And I think that's hopefully a better outcome in the end.
We shall see.
We shall see. Now, Joe, there are topics. I mean, we've covered quite a bit of ground in the last 27 minutes, but were there topics you wanted to talk about from our earlier call that you thought we should go into, or did we hit most of the highlights here?
I think we hit a lot of topics in general. I mean, the digital asset space has so many different angles, plays, pushes. I think the number one thing I just try to tell people is educate yourself. Just like anything that's new, right? You got to get out there and explore and educate yourself. And that's part of our responsibility, being whether it be a fintech or being a financial institution, is like we're trying to educate our consumers. So for us, we're trying to make sure our members stay educated on this stuff. And if it then enables us to give a better member experience through whether it be a technology and or a shift in something else, that's what we're going to pursue, and we're going to make sure we can give the best experience to our members at the best price. So if that's a new innovation technology, we're going to pursue it.
And I loved your earlier point. For anybody interested in the space, you learn by doing. And I would take it one step farther. My wife had this saying they had in medical school that I loved, which was see one, do one, teach one. And they say you don't really know it until you've tried to teach it. So go out and see it. You don't just read about it. Like go and do it. Go. Get a wallet, find a space, do the research, figure out what you want, and then go try and explain it to, I explain it to my wife or to my dad or whoever that's interested. And I go, then he asked me extra questions. I go, I don't know. So I don't know it as well as I thought I did, but I'm going to go like that. Really, I feel like when you can explain it to somebody, then you've really learned it. So see one, do one, teach one, maybe a good approach for that. But you can't just read. You've got to go and you got to touch, interact, do. I put a little bit of money aside. So this is just my not trying to invest and be a Bitcoin millionaire, but I'm going to put $1,000 or $2,000 aside and go, this is just a learning budget to go and invest in my own knowledge and education in the space. If that means I got to buy a digital racehorse, whatever, that's what I'm going to allocate some funds to do. Cause it's like taking a course. I got to be willing to pay for the education. That's like my cost of admission. So that's my advice. All right, Joe, I got 3 questions I ask everybody at the end of this podcast. So here they are, and in the same order that everybody gets asked, I would say no particular order, but that is particular order. The first one is, what's the best piece of advice you've ever gotten, career advice?
When I read this question, I literally was like, God, there's so much good advice that I've gotten over the years. It's hard to like sum it down to one good thing. So I'm going to give two small pieces. One is as soon as you realize you're the smartest person in the room, leave. So always look and find other people around you who can make you better and get smarter. And then the second is help others without expecting anything back. And that's more of a life piece of advice than career. But I definitely apply it to my career. And I don't go through my career trying to help somebody and then knowing like, well, now you owe me a favor, or now something I want to get back from you. It's how can I give back to the industry? How can I do things? How can I help educate somebody? How can I do? Because God only knows when I'm going to need some help, and maybe it'll come back to me, maybe it won't, but with no expectation.
Okay, give with no expectations and never be the smartest person in the room. I tell my kids all the time, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. It's good advice. All right, second question. What's the best piece of advice you've gotten on, I usually ask about the consumer lending space, but we'll say consumer lending or digital assets, buyer's choice.
Piece of advice or prediction / piece of advice. So I think this is interesting. Learn by doing is definitely one that, whether it's technology, innovation, lending, financial education, I had to learn by doing. Like my parents didn't give me a financial education. Schools don't give me a financial education. So learn by doing was in the same camp that was. And then my awkward prediction for consumer lending is that we're going to do a 40-year mortgage before we realize it. It's coming.
40. Why? That's usually bold prediction is my last question, but you got there. A 40-year mortgage. Why?
Where we're headed with prices, where we're headed with costs, where we're headed with just ease of use by a consumer. I think in the end, why do we have 30s is the first question, right? Like, so if you're going to say, well, why 40? Then why 30? Why 15? Why 5? Why any of these? Interest only, right? So it's all fitting to the consumer's needs. And it just seems like the 30-year mortgage was based out of necessity, what now, 100 years ago? And so is it the same necessity today? Does the same duration make sense? Does the same horizon make sense? So I think with the interest rate risings, with inflations, with cost of living, recession, I think this next weird cycle of credit is going to produce some interesting lending terms and mortgages that we've never seen before.
40. Why not 50? I'll go with 50. It's a nice round number.
Yeah. Because if we jump to 50, it's too extreme. So we got to jump to 40 first.
40 and then 50. All right. 40, the 40-year mortgage. That's a bold. You have met the bar of a bold prediction. I appreciate you making the time today. This was a great conversation. I enjoyed it. I'm sure the audience will. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate you.